Hi, my name is Annabella, but we're all friends here, so you can call me Bella. And I'm going to be talking about my poem Aftersound. So, this is a poem that's about grief, it's about loss, it's about immigration, it's about the transmutations between love and trauma, and it's about my grandpa who passed away when I was 10 years old, which was 10 years ago. So, it took me 6 months to write this poem. And for a really long time, I saw it as a failed poem, less because I didn't know what I was trying to say, and more because I was stopping myself from going back into the past and exploring alternate possibilities, because old me thought that that was a very dangerous and unproductive thing to do. And it wasn't until I finished this poem, I think it was on the 28th of August, 2023, that I reflected on what the message that was coming through. And actually, I wrote this down. I said that this is a poem about being witness to the death of a loved one and how that moment is bittersweet because you're relieved that they finally get to rest after a lifetime of fighting whatever illness afflicts them. And you're sitting with that knowledge and you're holding their hand and you're watching them take their last breath. And you know that this breath, and by extension, their life, is going to echo through your own. And you're going to have to grow while they will stay fixed in your memory. You told me that you were only schoolboys when you wandered in the wandering soul. That you still hear the crackle of rifles in Australian thunder. That you've seen how boys can shriek, then sigh in their lightning lives. You aged in the decrescendos that whisked from their mouths, gaped in the shape of their mother's breasts. The reason I wanted to write this in second person and begin with that anaphora of you went through this and you did that, is because my grandpa was the type of person who always put himself last. So he'd cook for us, then he'd be the one to eat last. And so that conscious choice of putting you first is trying to regift, I guess, that sense of priority and importance back to him. The title of this poem is Aftersound, and that title came about by draft five. This went through like 10 drafts. And at the time, I just watched a movie called After Sun by Charlotte Wells, and it really stuck with me. It's about this daughter who's all grown up now, and she has to construct a really full and realized portrait of her dad, but she's doing it purely off memory and like found footage. And so it's a poem about, it's a movie about recognizing that your parents and your grandparents lived entire lives before you, and they went through things that only you will begin to understand as you're getting older. And so I sort of named my poem inspired by that movie. I also wanted to conflate this idea of the act of wandering and then the wandering souls, because in my research for this poem, I was reading about how in Vietnamese Buddhist culture, um, souls or people that weren't buried immediately after death were thought to be lost and wandering. And in researching the war, uh, the Vietnam War, I read that there was an operation called Operation Wandering Soul, where US soldiers would record and coalesce the cries of babies and women, and play it back to soldiers as a form of psychological warfare. Um, so I wanted to go back to that moment, back to boyhood, in order to interrogate who or where my grandfather might have come from. So I also wanted to begin with this idea of thunder because I'm very interested in how thunder has such a short lifespan, but so much happens within seconds or even milliseconds.
And that's why I wanted to compare that to the lives of the boys as well, their lightning lives. I wanted to give them that space, even though their lives were cut prematurely. I wanted to recognize the impact of them. I always think about, and I'm only discovering now after my grandpa's death, all of the trauma that he uh, carried with him when he immigrated here. And so only a few years ago, I found out that he was terrified of water, even though he took us to our swimming lessons, and just all those little things. Which is why I likened the crackle of the rifles to the thunder that we experience here.
But now, your wrists are banded, ankles blanketed, and you're saying, we come into this world kicking and screaming. Is it too much to ask to leave on a quiet breath? Your world said yes.
So I wanted to transport the audience from the beginnings of my grandpa's life now to the end of my grandpa's life, which was 2014. And it's a really distinct year to me because in 2014, we spent a lot of time in rehab centers visiting him and then also in hospitals visiting him. But that age, those settings were almost playgrounds for us. We, we always wanted to play at the hockey table that was in the rehab center, and we always wanted to go to the roof. And our grandpa never made us feel bad about that, because we were kids who just wanted to play. He encouraged us to do so as well. Our grandpa, as a figure in our lives, was the earliest model and form of selflessness and generosity that we'd witnessed. This line about coming here kicking and screaming, and asking to leave on a quiet breath. When I performed that at BPS, it was the line that had the most reaction, and I think it's because it speaks to a very universal idea of we all of our entrances to this world are very bloody and violent, and our first parts are blood as well. And so I wanted to use that experience as almost a parallel to my grandpa's experience because I sort of see him as being born twice. So, once at birth, but also a second time having to leave his home and come into Australia in an equally arduous way.
It chased you into the ocean, into a camp, into a shabby shed in a backyard in Chester Hill, in a place where the rain fell so violent it sizzled like static. In a year when Flight 370 tumbled into nothingness and tragic headlines rolled like a long illness, and so you switched the channel from 9 to 99 for the last time, before the lightning shot that sitcom laughter, and the old box surrendered to white noise.
So these lines and the imagery of my grandpa's world chasing him away is actually a homage to one of the most formative poems that shaped me as a writer, which is Home by Worcestershire. And it actually begins, no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. And so I wanted to pay homage to that image of home chasing you out. I found it really powerful. So I mentioned a bunch of things that happened, world events that happened in 2014, because it was a really big year for me personally, but also just for the world. And at that age, at 10 years old, I was just becoming very aware of tragedy, catastrophe, and just the presence of that. And it's something that our grandpa was just very good at shielding us from initially. 2014, when we lost our grandpa, was also the year I found myself being the most creative, and I found inspiration being the most, I guess, potent for me. I think it's because it's the year that I recognized that sometimes the most broken hearts can feel the most genuine love because they know, I guess, what's at stake. Um, and that happened really early on in our lives, and from there I was just able to feel the full range of emotion. I went from, feeling absolute joy to feeling absolute sorrow. Sometimes that would sit side by side, which was a very new thing for me. I didn't understand that. And between those two extreme emotions, I also felt everything in between. Anger, desperation, fear, nostalgia, yearning. And so having that big loss at 10 years old just made me very aware, just of the full spectrum of the things we can feel in our life. So yeah, 2014. That's when I learned to appreciate life, which led me to a lot of really corny Tumblr quotes and Pinterest quotes. But it also led me to poetry. So
Water dripped from ceiling to couch, eyes to lips, seeped through the pants of your trembling toddlers, and so you said, "Don't worry. The thunder is really the fairies banging on their drums. A loud life is a lively life." So even before the sitcom settled like rain, you had us laughing true.
yeah, so I grew up on sitcoms, specifically Friends. Grew up on Friends. I was very interested in sitcoms as an image because they have the laughing track, and it's very obvious that it's constructed and it's artificial, and then it's placed in, and yet that sort of a fake artificial sound, that forced laughter, was actually a really comforting sound to me when I was a kid growing up. If there was any conflict in the family, we would sort of just turn up the sitcoms in our bedrooms. In a perverse way, the forced laughter somehow turned genuine or true.
And so all you must do is take my hand. Are you comfortable? Are you warm? Can you still hear me?
I never got that moment with my grandpa. 10-year-old me was actually just sleeping at home when he passed away. And so this poem is both a gift to him, but it's a gift to myself. Um, that 3 minutes just to curate my final words to him. And it's something I never got, and something I think a lot of us just don't have the privilege of getting. And those three questions, are you comfortable? Are you warm? Can you still hear me? I wanted to reverse the caregiver role, and I wanted to imply that you've given us so much, that we now have the tools to go forth in the world with the care that you taught us and give that care to other people. So that's what those three questions are capturing.
And when you performed it at BBS, I think I noticed that you choked up a bit as well.
I did.
Because
I
I
did.
actually know a bit.
I did.
So
Yeah.
if you want to talk about those
Okay.
two things.
Sure. When I did perform these questions, and honestly, every time I do perform this segment, it's really hard for me because I always choke up, because it's just the point in the story where it's a life fading, just asking that question, can you still hear me? I think when I perform that, it's just with the knowledge of knowing the answer to that is no. But that question is more of a way to deal with that, like a defense mechanism. But I get really sad when I have to say that. And I also think just like it's that attempts to just soothe with the voice. And it almost doesn't matter what you're saying, but you just want, like, what a privilege it would be if the last thing that your loved one heard was just your voice.
This is no place for guilt. He sailed through waves of water and blood, ran from the ghost tape of crying babies, crying through wet jungle air. Also, you could sing as you danced a plastic helicopter above my cot like it was nothing. No one deserves it more than you, to leave your second life on a sigh. Don't worry, don't wonder. We will age in your Aftersound.
So I included the image of the plastic helicopter, and in another poem I wrote for my grandpa, I also included the image of a Nerf gun because I was very interested in these toys, these toys that are made for the entertainment and joy of children, but simultaneously they also are reminiscent of violence, in our parents' and grandparents' memory. I can't help but laugh and chuckle when I perform that onomatopoeia, um, because it brings back very fond memories. Our grandpa just made a lot of sounds. He would make the sound of like the tut 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 tut, or the kookaburra laughing. If I do it now, it's gonna be really bad. He did it really well. Or whenever he'd tickle us, he'd go took a leg like that. So it's a good laughter. Also a nervous one because I get nervous sometimes performing that line. I think one thing I didn't have as a child was just awareness, consciousness that the time was limited. And look, I think that's very normal. But I also just want to capture this idea that it's actually I was inspired by the final line in Ocean Vuong's poetry collection, Time is a Mother. This one right here. um, the line is, "Our present tense was not too late." Um, that's what I want to remind the audience. The present tense is not too late. I think this might just show how like young my mindset is. But when I left school, if I was just saying goodbye to a lot of things, youth, a big part of which my grandpa sort of signified, and just people, and I found myself lamenting a lot of what was lost in the moment. But I really am sort of shifting into that idea now. Now is never. It's not too late. Now is not too late to reflect on things or to change things. Or I think of like for me, I used to represent I'd lost part of my Viet culture. Um, but now I'm more of the mindset of now it's not too late to relearn the language, to ask my mum to teach me how to cook the food. So that's why I really like that line. This idea of leaving life on a sigh, I wanted to recontextualize the sigh that I mentioned in the first part of the poem. The boys who shriek then sigh in their lightning lives. So there, the sigh signifies the fading of a life, and it sort of holds space and laments that and mourns that. This second iteration, I'm a big fan of like sort of mirroring and like cyclical structures, so bringing things back because I feel like we live our lives in cycles to an extent. Um, so it's this permission almost to say, hey, you're good now. You can leave on a sigh in a way that your world didn't let you, and in a way that you've always wanted, is to signify instead uh, that moment of rest and reward of a hard-earned, a hard-working life that finally gets to reap the benefits and move on without feeling guilty. So I was very, again, tying back into that idea of decrescendo or the sigh or the aftermath or the aftersound of thunder. So that final stanza, it functions almost as permission, and from the receiver of care to the caregiver, to say you don't have to feel bad about leaving. You've modeled what love looks like for us, and we'll take that forth with us. Yeah, and you're going to be our compass and our roadmap forward. So we can take it from here, essentially. And yeah, so that's my poem, Aftersound.